Hi everybody, this is Noelle from Petitti's, and we are outside on a lovely spring day, and we're going to do a spotlight on Hellebores, okay? Hellebores are also known as Lenten Roses. Sometimes you hear them be called snow roses or Christmas roses, and there's a couple different types, so we'll talk about that. But they are one of the best perennials in Northeast Ohio. They grow so well for us. They're so easy. So if you're thinking about starting a perennial or you've never grown a perennial plant, try Hellebores. They're such an awesome plant. I'm going to talk to you why, but let's start the spotlight with all the different things that you need to know to care for these guys. And again, keep in mind, easy peasy. Okay, so to start out with their sunlight conditions, and basically they're a great shade plant. So there's not, oh, I shouldn't say that. There are a lot of good flowering shade plants out there, but this one will really stand out in a shady area. So part shade to full shade especially, so usually that 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight to 4 hours or less of direct sunlight, this plant will do it, okay? They'll do very nicely for you. Conversely, if you put them out in sun, they will survive, but they really like moist soil. So you're gonna have to pay a little bit more attention to the moisture in the soil, keep them well watered if you do put them in full sun, but they'll still do their job out there, okay? The other thing that we like to talk about with Lenten Roses is that, again, with that soil, they like nice, enriched, moist, but well-drained soil. So if you can provide that for them, so before planting these guys, if you can go ahead and amend your soil with any type of organic matter, it could be sweet peat, compost, humus, whatever you have on hand, that's going to help in the long run with these. Ultimately, they do very well in our clay soil conditions as long as you're getting some drainage, because if they get too wet or sit in water, they can develop crown rot. So just be aware that that is the one thing that you want to avoid. You don't want them sitting in wet. There's really not a lot of plants out there that love sitting in water for a long time. So just keep that in mind. Well-drained but moist conditions. They do have a little bit of drought tolerance there. So again, kind of planted in a woody area or an area where it's underneath trees or nearby shrubs that are shading them. It's okay, they might get a little bit drier because of the root systems of those more established, bigger plants, and that's okay. They can tolerate that once they get their roots established and start growing and naturalizing in an area, and boy, they do a great job of that. Okay, so let's talk next about feeding these plants. These plants are just, again, standard perennial plants. So what we talk about when we're fertilizing them is we feed them plant tone and iron tone in the spring, and then midsummer, we actually give them a little boost with Osmocote green cap, and they do phenomenally well. They're not heavy feeders, they're not low feeders, just right in the middle. So they really like their fertilizer if you can feed them. If you can only do it once in spring and you forgot about midsummer, no problem. That's when they're actively growing, okay? So that giving them that fertilizer at that time of the year is phenomenal. I forgot to mention that they are super cold tolerant. They are hardy from zone 4 to zone 9. And here in Northeast Ohio, we're in 6A, so we're kind of in the middle there. And 6A is typically -10 degrees is our low to -5. And we had a pretty good winter this past winter, and they've done really nice for us. Again, you know, are very hardy, very cold hardy. And I'll tell you that the only thing that we've really seen over the winter moving in is that if they didn't have a snow cover on top of their foliage, you will see the plants. The foliage stays fairly evergreen and will kind of rise up a little bit, but when they're not covered with snow, they actually can get a little bit of scorching burn marks on them, maybe get a little bit tattered if they're in a windy spot. So those are the types of things that you want to make sure that you're looking out for when you're planting them and siting them to plant. Is maybe a little protected area where it's not as windy would make the foliage look a little bit nicer, a little bit more entire, intact. Also, again, if they get some snow cover, that's okay. It's actually protecting that foliage over the winter as well. Okay. Another thing that we should talk about is the care. So how easy are they? They're really, really easy, okay, to take care of out there in the garden. So when I was mentioning that kind of scorched or tattered foliage, no problem. As soon as you go ahead and cut back that foliage down to the ground, they will produce all new. So as soon as you're able to get out there in spring, work around the hellebores, you'll see that these plants will really regenerate a lot of new growth at that time. And again, Lenten rose, meaning that they do produce at the time of Lent, so you'll see them very actively growing at the time of Lent. But again, for a long period of time. So let's talk about their blooms really quick, because these blooms will start blooming and continue to bloom sometimes 10 weeks, sometimes 12 weeks, depending on how cool it stays. And again, being a spring bloomer, they do like those cool temperatures, cold temperatures even. As soon as we get into the heat of summer, you're gonna see those flowers fade, sort of dry on the stems, which is really great, a great feature of this plant, and then just kind of fade back eventually. Do you need to deadhead the hellebores? Sure, that always helps the plant produce more numerous blooms for you, buds and blooms. But like I mentioned, these flowers will actually dry on their stems and stay fairly colorful into the summer season. So again, if they start blooming late March and continue blooming or looking showy into June, you've got a really nice, long, showy perennial plant out there. So that's something that's a great feature on them too. Their flowers are really interesting. They're actually in the ranunculus family. So that's what we call the buttercup family. And they are cousins with things like clematis and delphinium. So they do have a similar bloom if you look close to them. The true flowers are on the inside here. These are very, very colorful sepals. Most of your hellebores have 5 sepals on the outside. There are some varieties that have doubled that, so they look a little bit more frilly and things, so I'll show you in just a bit. But this is what that true flower looks like. And if you look kind of close to it and maybe open it up a little bit, it does look like clematis a bit, okay? So they are, again, relatives. I'll also say with some of these varieties, I would say new modern breeds or crosses that in the past, hellebores have been kind of a nodding flower that they produced. So you'd always walk out into the garden and kind of lift their faces up like this one. We would lift their faces up and look inside the flower. But with the newer varieties, and especially I've talked about this before, it's called the HGC collection. And there's some newer breeds out here too. But with the HGC varieties, the flowers tend to lift themselves up tall on the stems and then look right at you. So most of these flowers are standing upright. You don't have to pick up their heads. So that's been a really cool breeding improvement with these plants. The other thing that we found is with the better breeding, the stems are super strong. You will see multiple buds and flowers being produced from the stem. You'll also see more buds and flowering stems coming from the base. So when you come to select your favorite Lenten roses, go ahead and make sure you're inspecting and looking down into the plant to see that new growth coming up, more buds, more flowering for you, obviously, in the long run. Okay. I will have to tell you that this plant is one of the best deer resistant, bunny resistant plants out there in the garden. Again, it is rarely touched by herbivores, which is awesome for us. And again, it just is really reliable and dependable. It's very long-lived. I have clumps that are probably a good 20 plus years old in the garden. I should say not my garden, but my mother's garden that I started there, and they continue to produce and do really well. I should mention also, how do you propagate these plants? Well, division, I think, is probably the easiest way to do that, where you can dig the entire clump and you can literally divide the crown of that clump into different sections. That's an easy way to do it. Some of the older varieties will seed and produce some seed, and the seed will develop around the plant, the original plant. And that's one way too. You can always dig those seedlings and move those into different areas as well. I should mention, dividing in spring is really easy. And normally we say divide opposite season they flower. But hellebores, it's easy when they just start to develop and push up. You can dig around them and then go ahead and you can kind of divide in between those new buds and crowns that are coming up, okay? So keep that in mind. I think let's talk about varieties, because there's so many wonderful, beautiful new varieties. And I'll kind of start down in the front here. This is an HGC variety. It is actually Lenten Roses white. It is a beautiful pure white. You can see it there, but when it starts to fade, it turns like a nice light limey green, or maybe even a chartreuse green. It is just a beautiful pastel color. It really stands out against its dark leathery foliage. And I should mention that foliage has such a beautiful texture and glossiness to it. It's a beautiful texture out there in the shade garden. It really complements hosta leaves. It complements some of the maybe more ferny leaves of, let's say, a bleeding heart or something like that. It's just really just a pretty foliage out there. Serrated edges on the leaves too, so beautiful plant. This very dark one in front is actually called Nightingale. Nightingale, I wanted to put it next to the white. I love how deep and almost like frosty, deep purple, almost black it is. This is actually what they call a snow rose. It'll come up a little bit sooner than some of the Lenten roses, or I should say a little bit earlier in the season. So you might see this one, Nightingale, pop up above the snow line, start to bloom, and then you might see some of the other Lenten rose varieties come up next to it, okay? We have Frosty here. Frosty's a really beautiful variety again, a bright white, very pretty, large flowers on Frosty. And then right here, it looks similar to Nightingale, but it's a little bit different. This one's gonna be Brunello. And Brunello has more of a burgundy red, and it's a little bit later bloomer than Nightingale. So again, you can get sort of a lengthening of the season if you plant some of the early blooming types of hellebores and some of the later blooming types of hellebores. So it's really cool. So when you look at your tag, make sure you might see Snow Rose, which is gonna be earlier. You might see Lenten Rose, which is gonna be a little bit later. You might see Christmas Rose, which I'll point out this one. So this is Winter Ballet Leona. Sorry, I was going to say Leonora. It's Leona. And Leona is actually considered even earlier than Nightingale. So again, you've got some beautiful, clear, sort of rosy reds here, and then some darker purples, some whites, some burgundies. I mean, there's so many different varieties and colors out there. Beautiful variety right here. This is called Anna's Red. She's a little bit shorter. And I should have mentioned hellebores are right around, let's say, the 18-inch to 24-inch mark, typically in the garden height-wise. They will get and fill out and naturalize, so they'll get bigger and bigger as they do mature. First year, they might sleep a little bit. Second year, they might creep a little bit, meaning just get a little bit larger. It's the third year you have the Hellebores in the ground. Woo, they just become this lovely patch of color and foliage. And that's really your true perennials that grow well for us. That's how they develop. So keep that in mind. Be patient with them for the first 2 years, but the third year, and even Taylor has got some beautiful 3-year Hellebores that have just flourished, and they look absolutely gorgeous this spring season as well. She might show you a picture. And then Anna's Red's pretty. It is a hybrid cross. There's a lot of genetics here, and I'll have Taylor take a close-up picture of the foliage. The foliage has a lot of veining and interest to it, and that's what we're starting to see with some of these newer varieties now, where they have not only beautiful upright flowering and a lot of buds, but they also have this lovely marbled foliage. And then we do have 2 marbled varieties available right now too, sort of a bicolor pink and cream, and that light green as well. So we have Maddie Marble and we have Macy Marble too. She's down in front, a little bit shorter right here, but their marbled foliage is really quite interesting, really beautiful. It'd be great again in your shade garden, a lot more texture and contrast there. I talked about Leona, so she's there. I've got some really pretty ones down in front, and this is one of our favorites, and this is actually called Pink Frost. She's brand new. She doesn't have a lot of foliage on her. She was probably planted in late fall at Casa Verde, and she's popping up really beautifully. Pink Frost, I will tell you, is one of the most compact, but really beautiful, really floriferous. She has got buds all over her. New foliage is coming from the bottom. New buds are down at the bottom of this plant too. So look for Pink Frost. And like I said, if you're looking for sort of a pinky, a little bit of mauve, a little bit of cream, she is a fantastic variety. So do look out for that one. I have a couple of doubles here that I was talking about earlier, and they do have multiple rows of these sepals, these colorful sepals here. This is actually called, it's part of the wedding party. I think that's the right series of it. Taylor will tell you. But this is Mother of the Bride, and then also Confetti Cake right here, which has these beautiful speckles on the sepals. Really pretty plant. These plants, again, not part of that HGC series, but if you're looking for something a little bit different, obviously a lot showier flower. They are nodding, so you're going to have to lift them up a little bit to take a look at the inside of the flower, but it's a small price to pay if you're looking for something really unique and unusual. And this one, this is Rose Bicolor, I think. Oh, sorry, Frosted Rose. So she's a beautiful one too. Lots of coloring in the sepals, beautiful pinky purple edges on this one too. So that's a newer variety for us as well. HGC series, look at those strong stems, upright flowers, really great. So there's a lot to choose from, folks, and we don't even have all the varieties here right now at Oakwood, but they'll be slowly but surely coming in for this season. Are they okay to plant right now? Absolutely. If you have a patch of soil in the landscape or the garden that's draining for you, and you can work that area and go ahead and dig without it being muddy or squishy or anything like that, that's great. You can plant Hellebores right now. They're, like I said, very cold tolerant, frost tolerant. They do a really great job in the garden. Another thing that I wanted to mention with them really quickly is they go so well with coral bells. Okay, this is your heuchera. This purple one is called Spellbound, and you can tell why we picked it out, and you'll see Stella has displayed the Hellebores with this variety because it just resonates all those beautiful purple and pink colors along with the coral bells. But she's also used a new lime coral bell that we have there, and this is called Northern Exposure Lime. And this lime is looks like it's going to have some really, really nice kind of darker pink bells, which is good for a new lime variety for us. But again, that bright chartreuse with some of these purples is such a pretty combination too. So something to think about with your hellebores, definitely for that part shade, again, shady area. And most of your coral bells can go out in the sun as well. They need a little bit of moisture in order not to get too dry and scorched too. So think about that. So hellebores, I mean, wonderful plants, early bloomers. No, they're not native to Ohio or the US. They're native to Europe, developed mostly in Turkey and that region. So no, they're not native, but they are so easy, naturalized. They attract early pollinators as well, contain a lot of nectar, and deer and bunny resistant, just awesome. Enjoy.